Rome stood at a crossroads. Forgiveness could unite the empire, but fury could tear it apart. At the center of it all was Julius Caesar. Did he rule with mercy or with vengeance? Julius Caesar was a very important man in ancient Rome. He lived a long time ago, over 2,000 years in the past. Rome was a powerful city, and it had a government called the Republic. In the Republic, people were supposed to share power. No single person was meant to be the king or have total control. Caesar was a soldier, a general, and a politician. He was very smart and very ambitious. He wanted to be the most powerful person in all of Rome. This made him famous, but it also made him many enemies who were afraid of his great ambition. He changed Rome forever with his actions. Many people in Rome loved Julius Caesar. He was a hero to them. As a general, he won many great battles. He expanded Rome's territory, bringing back great wealth and glory to the city. The common people especially saw him as their champion. He spoke to them and seemed to understand their problems. He promised them a better life. When he returned from his wars, crowds would cheer for him in the streets. They saw him not just as a great leader, but as someone who was on their side, fighting for them against the rich and powerful senators who often ignored their needs. At the same time, many powerful Romans feared Julius Caesar. These were mostly the senators, the men who ran the Roman Republic. They saw Caesar's ambition as a great danger. They believed he wanted to destroy the Republic and make himself a king. In Rome, the idea of a king was a terrible one. Their ancestors had thrown out their last king hundreds of years earlier. The senators watched as Caesar became more and more popular with the people and with his loyal soldiers. They worried that his power was growing too large for any one man to have, upsetting the balance that kept Rome free. This conflict between Caesar's supporters and his enemies defined his life. He was a man who could be incredibly kind and generous to his friends and followers. Yet he could also be ruthless and brutal to those who stood in his way. He crossed a river called the Rubicon with his army, which was against the law. This act started a terrible civil war. He fought against other Romans to gain ultimate power, so the question of who he really was, a hero or a villain, is very complicated. He was a man who inspired both great love and great fear, and people still debate his legacy today. There are many reasons why some people believe Julius Caesar deserved forgiveness. One of the strongest reasons was his famous mercy. In ancient times, it was common for victors in a civil war to execute their defeated enemies. Caesar often did the opposite. He frequently pardoned the men who had fought against him. He would let them live and even allow them to return to their homes and keep their property. This was a very unusual act of kindness. He showed that he preferred to win over his enemies with forgiveness rather than kill them. This policy, known as his clementia, or mercy, made many people think he was a good and forgiving leader. Caesar also made many positive changes for the people of Rome. These are called reforms. He knew that many poor people were in debt, so he created laws to help them. He gave land to his veteran soldiers, giving them a way to support their families after their service. He also started large building projects in Rome, which created jobs for many workers. One of his most famous reforms was fixing the calendar. The old Roman calendar was a mess. Caesar created a new one based on the sun, which is very similar to the calendar we still use today. These changes made life better for ordinary Romans, and for this they loved and admired him. His personal charm and generosity were also well known. Caesar was known to be a loyal friend. He rewarded the people who supported him and stood by them through difficult times. He was not a distant ruler who hid in a palace. He moved among the people and understood their lives. He gave them grand public games and feasts. These acts made him incredibly popular. The common people of Rome felt that he cared about them in a way that the distant, wealthy senators did not. They saw him as a protector, someone who was using his great power to help them rather than to help himself. They would easily forgive his illegal actions. Finally, some might argue that Caesar's actions were necessary. The Roman Republic was already in deep trouble before he came to power. It was corrupt and unstable. Powerful men were constantly fighting each other for control, and civil wars were becoming common. Caesar may have believed that the old system was broken beyond repair. Perhaps he thought that only a single strong leader could bring peace and order back to Rome. In this view, his seizure of power was not just for his own ambition. It was a difficult but necessary step to save Rome from tearing itself apart, making his rule a solution rather than a problem. On the other hand, many Romans had every reason to be furious with Caesar. His ambition seemed to have no limits. The Roman Republic was built on the idea that power should be shared. Caesar broke this fundamental rule. He used his loyal army to march on Rome itself. This was a shocking act of treason. By crossing the Rubicon River with his legions, he declared war on his own country. This started a bloody civil war where Romans killed other Romans. Many thousands of people died in the battles that followed. For the families of those who died, forgiveness would have been impossible. They saw him as a man who sacrificed his country for his own personal glory. Caesar also took power in a way that destroyed Roman traditions. After he won the civil war, he had himself declared dictator for life. In Rome, a dictator was meant to be a temporary emergency position. By making it permanent, Caesar was basically acting like a king, even if he refused the title. He filled the Senate with his own supporters, weakening its power. He controlled the elections and the laws. To his enemies, he was a tyrant who had crushed the liberty that Romans held so dear. They believed he had single-handedly murdered the Republic that had stood for nearly 500 years, and for this he deserved the ultimate punishment. Furthermore, his quest for power was incredibly brutal. While he was famous for his mercy to Roman opponents, he was not so kind to foreigners. During his conquest of Gaul, his campaigns were responsible for the deaths of a huge number of people. Some ancient writers claim that 1 million Gauls were killed and another 1 million were sold into slavery. While this was a great military victory for Rome, it was an act of extreme violence. His critics saw this not as glorious conquest, but as a cruel and bloody campaign designed to increase his own wealth, fame, and political power back in Rome. This ruthlessness showed a dangerous side to his character. Finally, the fear he created was a powerful reason for fury. As his power grew, it became dangerous to speak out against him. The senators who valued the Republic felt trapped. They saw the traditions of their ancestors being swept away by one man's ambition. They feared that if Caesar lived, Rome would never be a free republic again. His power would be passed down to his heir, creating a monarchy. This fear is what drove a group of senators to conspire against him. They believed that killing Caesar was the only way to save the Republic. For them, it was not murder, it was an act of justice for a tyrant. So we are left with two very different pictures of Julius Caesar. On one side, we see a man who was merciful to his enemies. He brought much-needed reforms to help the poor and organized the chaotic Roman world. He was a brilliant general and a charismatic leader who was loved by many of the common people. From this point of view, his actions, while extreme, could be seen as necessary to fix a broken system. People who focus on his positive achievements and his acts of kindness might argue that he deserved forgiveness. They would say that he was building a better, more stable future for Rome, even if he had to break some old rules to do it. On the other side, we see a man whose personal ambition led to a devastating civil war. He destroyed the Roman Republic, the system of government that had defined Rome for centuries. He took absolute power for himself, becoming a dictator in all but name. He was responsible for immense bloodshed, both in his foreign wars and in the conflict against his own people. Those who focus on his illegal power grab and the violence he caused would argue that he was a tyrant. They would say that no amount of reform or personal charm could excuse the destruction of liberty. For them, justice, not forgiveness, was the only answer. Ultimately, deciding whether Caesar deserved forgiveness or fury is not simple. It depends on what a person values more, order and stability, or freedom and tradition. If you believe that a strong, effective leader is more important than a traditional but failing government, then you might be inclined to forgive Caesar. His reforms and the peace he brought after years of chaos could be seen as a fair trade for the loss of the old republic. He was a problem solver, and he used his power to get things done, which many people appreciated and felt was necessary for the good of the empire. However, if you believe that no one should be above the law and that liberty must be protected at all costs, then you would likely feel fury towards him. From this perspective, Caesar's ambition was a poison that killed the Roman Republic. His mercy and reforms cannot wash away the sin of making himself an absolute ruler. He set a dangerous example that power comes from military might, not from the law or the will of the people. There is no easy answer, and even 2,000 years later, people continue to debate whether he was a savior or a destroyer? The choice between forgiving him and condemning him remains a difficult one.